Hello, I'm KAMAHL Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, oil shock. Not only an attack on the heart of Saudi Arabia's oil facilities, but on global supplies. The billions spent on air defences proved to be useless against suspected drones and cruise missiles. We'll unpack what happens next and if the markets are ready.
I'm Rahila Mohammed on the island of Borneo, where Indonesia's new capital is due to be built. We'll tell you why people here are so concerned.
And why the almighty dollar is the talk of economic and political life in Argentina, as the country teeters on the brink of another debt default. It was, by any measure, an audacious attack and the worst attack on Middle East oil facilities since Saddam Hussein set fire to Kuwait's oil wells back in 1990. Drones or maybe cruise missiles travelling 500 kilometres across Saudi territory undetected to strike at the heart of its oil industry and to knock out 5% of the world's oil supply. As a result, oil prices spiked almost 20%. Now, they're still below the recent highs. That was $86 a barrel last October, when tensions between the United States and Iran were ratcheting up. But just why oil prices remain below those highs has something to do with where our global economy is right now, plus the huge reserves the world has accumulated. Now, according to the US Energy Information Administration, the world has 4.1 billion barrels of oil in storage, 1.4 billion held by governments, the rest by oil companies and trading houses. The United States has the capacity to hold 722 million barrels, and China has a store of almost 500 million barrels. So with all that supply and the global economy slowing, OPEC nations have been struggling of late to lift oil prices, despite help from Russia and other non-OPEC nations. Now, Saudi Arabia believes it can have the facility up and running in a matter of weeks. But if it takes, say, more than 6 weeks to fix the plants and to restore production levels, oil prices could head towards that $85 a barrel mark. So this is a real test for Aramco. Remember, it's already opening up its finances to the world as Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman attempts to float the company with an ambitious valuation of $2 trillion. But this attack, which is claimed by the Houthis, who the Saudis have been at war with in Yemen for the last few years, it just raises so many questions about the kingdom's ability to protect its own facilities, not to mention the billions it's paid for US defence systems. In fact, Russia took the opportunity to offer the Saudis its S-400 missile defence system. Let's get some answers now. Joining us is James P. Moore Jr. He is the CEO of the US-based Washington Institute for Business, Government and Society. Nice catchy title, that one.
Yes, indeed.
And earlier in your career, you were the US Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Trade Development as well.
Right.
OK, so we can get onto some of that later and put your trade hat on. But I think right now let's talk about the situation with Saudi Arabia and the oil attacks. And the word I've used is the audacity of it. The fact that the linchpin of Saudi infrastructure, the oil installations, the thing which matters the most, could get hit like this. Massively concerning, surely.
It is audacious. It's quite amazing that it was choreographed in such a way to have spokesmen from Yemen standing up and saying that they were the ones responsible for it, when it now appears from all intelligence that it was Iranian, not only directed, but came from Iranian soil. And so the notion, for example, that billions of dollars have been spent on the defense of Saudi Arabia to avoid this sort of thing happening certainly has been concerning, I think, on everybody's part. And what happens next is anybody's guess.
Well, what we saw initially was obviously a big spike in the oil price, which settled down again because the Saudis then said, no, we think we can bring this under control. What does it tell you about oil price volatility? Are we still sitting in this sort of 60, 70 range? Is there a risk of it heading up above 80, 90?
I don't think so. Quite honestly, as you and I are talking here, the price of oil is around $59 a barrel. And fortunately, Saudi Arabia was able to calm the markets very quickly after they even had an internal change as to the energy minister to really assure the markets that they would be back online very shortly. And so I think things will be fine. But clearly, there's a need to watch out for any future incidents that could create chaos.
So Washington and Riyadh, obviously, are big allies. The Saudis have bought plenty of arms from the US, defence systems as well. Defence systems which you might call into question right now. And in fact, Russia's President Vladimir Putin saw a perfect opportunity there and said, hey, why don't you buy our S-400 missile defence system? Because clearly the one you've got isn't working. It creates these other sort of battles within battles.
Well, President Putin has been, is, and will continue to be a master chess player.
OK. Right, let's put your trade hat on, if you don't mind, and talk about some of that, because we can't ignore what's happening between China and the United States as far as the trade war, the tariffs war, however you want to term it. Where do you see that going now that both sides sort of pulled back just a little bit for different reasons? Donald Trump started talking about Christmas, and then because the National Communist Congress was going to happen, we'll pull back. Where is the so-called trade war right now?
Well, you know, it's interesting. It's an interesting perspective for me because I was host to one of the very first Chinese delegations, trade delegations that ever came to Washington, D.C. It was so long ago that everyone who came in from China, headed up by the mayor of Shanghai, was wearing a Mao Zedong suit.
Oh, okay.
And in those days, the trading relationship was $4 billion exports, $4 billion imports, and the United States had a surplus of about $6 million. As of this year, at the end of June, which would be 6 months in 2019, that has changed dramatically. And we have sent about $52 billion worth of goods to China. They've sent us $220 billion. So the trade equation is rather dramatic. I think that there is a genuine concern on the part, of course, of Washington of trying to anticipate the 2020 election and what that's going to mean to the American consumer. And so I think it's fair to say that there may be a little bit of a punting of the ball in terms of how to be able to deal with this. There is no question, and President Trump has made this abundantly clear, that China has proceeded along a path that has been to the disadvantage of the United States, and that this has been building over a long period of time, and that what he is doing is simply trying to set things straight from what they should have been a long time ago. So that is very much the motivating force for him.
Well, this thing, the word war would suggest traditionally that someone would win or lose.
That's right.
Can't see anyone winning here,
No.
and let's remove it from just the United States and China as well. There is a global slowdown appearing as well, and this is surely a big part of that.
There's no question, but you know, interestingly, of course, the United States has been enjoying its 9th year of progressive growth. Consumer demand is strong. There are points of weakening in the economy, but they are minor in comparison with what's going on in other parts of the globe. But the United States cannot be by itself an oasis in the midst of the desert when it comes to trade and the world economy. But there is no question that President Trump feels confident enough in the strength at the moment of the U.S. economy, one of the reasons why he keeps pushing on the interest rate business, to really put his foot down and to try to be able to make some kind of a difference. So we'll see what happens.
Okay. Well, seeing as you mentioned interest rates, the Fed finally cutting rates. As per the pressure from we keep mentioning Donald Trump through the whole thing, kind of can't avoid it. Things, but he's been almost hassling the Fed and saying, you haven't got the best interests, the country's best interests at heart. You're not really working for the country. I mean, is this a pressure cut, or is it actually what is needed?
Well, interestingly enough, there's been no president since the Federal Reserve was founded back in the 1920s that a president has exerted so much pressure on the institution. There's no question that has got to count for something. And the chair of the Federal Reserve, who President Trump appointed to the position, has been, as they say, between a rock and a hard place. And the concern is not just the U.S. economy, but economies around the world who really are dependent on what those interest rates look like. And so, if we have a bad situation in the global economy outside of the United States, it's going to end up on our shores at some point. But it took a long time to be able to bring interest rates to where they are now. We faced, of course, the financial crisis in 2008. And so bringing those interest rates back to a semblance of reality took some real hard engineering on the part of the Federal Reserve. Now we're in a position where we're going to start cutting. Concern, obviously, is that if we do reach a point that we are going to be experiencing a recession, what tools will be left to be able to combat that recession? And so that's a big question on people's minds. But there's also economists who believe that this is the time to take down interest rates, because when you finally realize that you're in a recession, it will have been accumulating over a period of months before it actually hits. And so you've got to have a bit of a crystal ball in trying to determine where the economy is going to be. But make no mistake that the trade situation between China and the United States is having a direct impact on the Federal Reserve's decision-making powers as to whether they do reduce the interest rate. Because if we do get into a trade war, that is going to have such an impact on the economy that only federal interest rates and adjusting them is going to be one of the simple but very important tools to be able to contain the economic downfall.
James, well, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for joining us
Thank
today.
you very much.
Let's move to some other stories. And as rising sea levels threaten Indonesia's capital, President Joko Widodo is planning to relocate that capital to the island of Borneo. His decision is also about spreading the wealth of the nation more evenly across the 13,000 islands that make up the archipelago. Right now, Jakarta and the island of Java account for 58% of the country's economy. But as Rahila Mohammed now reports, there are concerns that a move to Borneo would adversely impact the very people who live there.
This largely untouched part of East Kalimantan will become the new capital of Indonesia if the president has his way. It's in stark contrast to the capital Jakarta, clogged with heavy traffic, smog and sinking. The pressure to move is rising, along with sea levels, which may mean the city of more than 10 million people could be underwater within the next 30 years. And this is where the city's relocation may end up. Borneo Island, known for its lush rainforest and rare wildlife. While it was chosen for being less prone to earthquakes and floods, there are concerns the massive move will threaten conservation efforts. Activists say mining and logging have already damaged some areas.
A new capital here will destroy the ecosystem. It will cause forest destruction, raise the temperature, risk forest fires, and during the drought season will create a water shortage.
Moving the capital has been discussed for decades, but recently resurrected by President Joko Widodo. Estimated to cost $32 billion, it will be one of the world's largest single infrastructure projects. The plan is to build the city on land between East Kalimantan's two largest cities, Balikpapan and Samarinda, connected by this 99-kilometer-long toll road. The first stage of construction will be around this land. There'll be a presidential palace, ministries and housing for government and schools. Elsewhere, there'll be hotels, businesses and offices to meet the demand of the city's new population. While the new capital is welcomed by many Indonesians, villagers in Pasir fear they'll be forced off land they've lived on for generations.
We worry about the legality of our land. Only 20% of us have a legal document to say it belongs to us. Foreigners have been coming here. It's causing tension in the community.
Government leaders in Jakarta say the exact site of the new city hasn't been revealed to avoid property speculation.
We don't need to ask people when we want to move the capital. It's up to the government to decide, as long as we don't destroy the environment or harm anybody.
While plans are still in their early stages, the first construction is expected to be complete by 2024. Moving an entire capital city will be a delicate balancing act for Indonesia's leaders, preserving the natural habitat while building their vision for a new concrete jungle.
And in addition to that report, Rahila caught up with Indonesia's planning minister, BAMBANG BRODJONEGORO. She began by asking him just how bad the situation was in Jakarta itself.
In fact, it's not just about Jakarta, but also it's about Java. First of all, the big regional disparity between Java and other islands in Indonesia. Java already contributes almost 60% of the economy and becoming the home of almost 57% of our population, meaning that 150 million people live in Java, while Java in terms of size is not, of course, the largest island in Indonesia, less compared to Sumatra, Kalimantan, Papua, and also Sulawesi. It means the Java is crowded, and Java created kind of big disparity, while Indonesia is, it's a big country. It's the biggest archipelagic in the world. So I don't think it's fair if everything just focusing on Java, especially in Jakarta, because Jakarta today is the center of everything in Indonesia. If you want to deal with the government, you go to Jakarta. If you want to deal with the business, finance, trade, other services, you go to Jakarta, even related to the industrial or manufacturing sector. So Jakarta itself, by GDP, contributing almost 15% as a province, and if you include also the Jakarta metropolitan area, which is larger area, that could contribute almost a quarter of the economy of the country from that area.
Speaking about the activity happening in East Kalimantan right now, there is mining, there's logging, and there's oil plantations. What happens to those sectors when you have an influx of people?
Well, I mean, first of all, on current situation, Kalimantan economic growth is lower than Java economic growth or even Sumatra and Sulawesi economic growth. They are one of the islands that having a lower economic growth. Why? Because commodity price. Their economy depends so much on natural resources, like what you mentioned. I mean, oil, not so much anymore because the production has been declining. Mining still there, coal and palm oil. So of course, the activity is still there, but of course, the economy cannot depend only on the natural resources because the price is fluctuative and the tendency today is declining. So we need to diversify the economy of Kalimantan by, for example, services sector, including government services that will be located in the new capital.
So we know that you are going to be footing the bill of 32 billion US dollars.
Yeah, around that.
Where is the money going to come from?
Yeah, we are going to invite private sector participation with many ways. Number one is asset management scheme, in which there will be a lot of assets that will be left behind when we move the capital, especially the asset that now becoming like this building, the office, and other government offices. And it's a huge value of asset in Jakarta, and also the asset in the new capital. So we are going to offer the asset for collaboration with private sector, and of course private sector will contribute the revenue to the government, and part of the revenue will be used to build the capital. Other than asset management scheme, we have the public-private partnership, mostly for infrastructure projects related in the new capital. And third, of course, we invite private sector participation, especially for commercial sector, housing, to be located in the new capital. So basically, we do not want to really disturb our budget.
There's also some worries about land speculation and the price of land increasing. And some people that we've spoken to in the area have told us that there's tensions brewing amongst the community because they haven't been informed about what's going to happen to where they stay. What do you say to this?
The land that will be used for the location of the new capital will be the land that almost 100% owned and managed by the government. So we are not going to buy or acquire land from somebody else or from other landowners, because as I mentioned, almost 100% now under the control of the government. If there is land speculation, of course, speculation will be there everywhere in the world. And that happens because the drive to get the advantage, to get the excessive profit. That could happen outside the area of the new capital, but not inside.
And what about resolving the issues in Jakarta? There's flooding, there's congestion.
Yeah.
Will you be leaving the city behind and moving forward on turning over a new leaf? Or Do you have a plan in place to fix the issues happening here?
We are going to upgrade Jakarta as the one of the prominent financial and business center of Southeast Asia. So far, that position belongs to Singapore, Kuala Lumpur, and Bangkok. Jakarta is a little bit behind. So we need to upgrade Jakarta, but we need also at the same time relieve the burden in Jakarta by moving only the government seat to the new capital. But others, I would like to say, the new capital will be like Washington DC, while Jakarta will be upgraded and developed like the New York City in the US.
What about the environmental concerns? East Kalimantan has been considered to be the lungs of the earth. A lot of environmental activists are worried about the impact this is going to have on the land there.
They don't need to worry, simply because, number one, our location is not going to affect the total protected forest in Indonesia, natural forest. The natural forest, protected forest will still be there, unaffected by the new capital. Number two, the city itself, the capital itself, will be designed with the approach of green and forest city, with minimum 50% of the area will be open green space. And in fact, in the area, we already identified some conserved forests and also some ex-mining activities that basically ruining the environmental condition. So we are going to rehabilitate the condition both in conserved forests as well as the ex-mining location. So basically, we are committed to even reforestation rather than deforestation.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed, Minister, for taking the time to speak to us.
Okay, thank you.
Finally this week, Argentina, where the currency is the peso, but the US dollar plays a crucial role in economic and political life. After President Mauricio Macri lost a primary election back in August, the peso then lost a quarter of its value. And now Argentina is burning through its foreign reserves to shore up the peso and to pay off dollar-denominated debt. Teresa Bonar with this look at why the dollar dominates in Latin America's third biggest economy.
It's 10 o'clock in the morning in Argentina, and the question everyone has is, how much is the dollar today? Argentina is in the middle of an economic crisis, and it's the US dollar that's in the spotlight once again.
Crises in Argentina are cyclical and things happen again. Argentines look at the dollar and people want to save themselves instead of the country in general. In the past year, recession is everywhere.
Even though the national money is the peso, it's the US currency what runs the economy. The main reason is inflation, because a raise in the value of the US dollar immediately translates to a raise in the price of almost everything.
In the early 20th century, Argentina was one of the richest countries in the world thanks to the export of beef, wheat, and other farm goods. But things changed in the 1930s because of the Great Depression in the United States and political instability. And since then, Argentina has defaulted on its sovereign debt several times, and inflation has almost always been in the double digit. This museum shows how the Argentine currency has depreciated over the years, and in a way it explains why Argentines prefer to save in US dollars.
The word crisis and devaluation appears repeatedly in the Coin Museum of Buenos Aires. Over the years, Argentina has not been able to solve its main problem. The economy needs dollars to grow, but the country spends more than it produces, so it needs to borrow abroad. That's what President Macri did since taking office in 2015.
Macri administration, when they took over, the expectation was to generate capital inflows and generate growth through investment. And what happened, you had a lot of portfolio inflows, but not as much investment. Macri was a bit too optimistic. It took too long to adjust the fiscal issues. He had to keep interest rates too high for too long, and people already now mistrust the value of the pesos.
And that's why people have been going to the banks to either buy dollars or get their money out.
The US dollar is not only used by the elite in Argentina, but by all sectors that run to buy dollars as soon as they have some cash. It's how people try to preserve their cash.
Calls to dollarize the economy are common in Argentina, but people like Mariana Lucy say it will not work out well.
In 1991 and 2001, there was an attempt to tie the peso to the dollar. It was a convertibility at that time. It was not a dollarization. But the state did not have a monetary policy. It controlled inflation, but it devastated the economy too.
It ended in the massive crisis in 2001. The next few months will be difficult ones for Argentina, that is unable to amend an economic pattern that repeats itself over and over again. Teresa Bo, Al Jazeera, Buenos Aires.
And that is our show for this week, but we'd love to hear from you. You can tweet or message me directly at KAMAHL AJE on Twitter with the hashtag AJCTC, or you can drop us an email. countingthecost@aljazeera.net is the address. And plenty more for you online at aljazeera.com/CTC. That'll take you straight to our page with individual reports, links, and entire episodes for you to catch up on. But that is it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm KAMAHL Santamaria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.